like there might be more.
Now, this one,
Welcome to the July 11th Delaware Public Service Commission meeting. Have the reading of the meeting minutes for June 20th, 2017, and there any corrections or changes to the minutes.
will we adopt the minutes as presented?
Is there any discussion on the motion to accept the minutes as presented? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions, the motion carries. The consent agenda, we've got the 3 items on the consent agenda. Any commissioner wish to have one of those items taken off, or any questions about them? If not, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. The regular agenda, we have in the first item is in the matter of the written notice of potential violation and associated civil penalties regarding Peninsula Oil Company. Will the representatives of Peninsula Oil Company please come to the table and Mr. Willard?
Yes, Chair and members of the Commission. In this case, the member of staff did a standard inspection of Peninsula Oil, and he found that various tests and inspections had not been done that they're required to do. These included testing of pressure limiting stations, cathodic protection system testing, inspection of gas odorization, and various other problems were discovered. This company also had violations last year. In going through all this, we talked to them, we sat down with them, we negotiated with them, and they actually entered into a consent agreement, which is attached to the proposed order. And we found 11 violations, and partly due to the fact that it was not a first violation, but rather a subsequent violation, the recommended penalty is $1,000 per violation for a total of $11,000. That's the staff's recommendation. The company has agreed with that and signed the consent agreement. And so the staff recommends the Commission to go ahead and impose that penalty.
Thank you, Mr. Willard. Mr. Ellis,
Yes.
will you please state your name for the record? And
Sure, I'm Brian Ellis.
Please make yourself comfortable. Have a seat.
Okay.
No need to stand up. We're not informal, but we're
Not that formal, I understand. Brian Ellis, attorney for Peninsula Oil.
And do we have any comments to make with respect to the agreement?
My client has agreed to enter into this consent, and we're willing to go forward with it.
Thank you. You're obviously aware that across the country we've had problems with gas pipelines and have killed people, and some very serious things can occur. And I think most of the commissioners would agree that you're here a second time. I forget when the last time was. It wasn't too long ago. It was last year, 2015. It's baseball season, so I assume you've heard the expression 3 strikes and you're out. This matter is very serious. These matters are very serious, and I know you're going to take it seriously. The commissioners have any questions about this matter?
I have a question for Mr. Ellis. Can you confirm for me, please, that there is a fire extinguisher now at Yorkshire Estate?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Palmer, who is actually the division head that knows what he's talking about, so I'll leave that for him.
Yes, we do have a fire extinguisher. My name is Steve Palmer, the petroleum propane manager for Peninsula Oil. Steve.
And the extinguisher is there, where is it kept?
It is kept on the fence, right inside our gate where our tanks and our regulators and valves are.
Mr. Chair.
Gray?
Yes, thank you. So I've read through the terms and conditions of the settlement agreement. I'm just a little bit curious. Can you tell me why the inspections were not done? Why a second time?
We hired an outside company to do it. They failed us. We have now hired a new company, J.D. Relic, out of Felton, Delaware, and they have all our trainings and our testing up to date.
Okay. So thank you for bringing all of those elements into compliance, because the inspections, the safety inspections done through the commission have been recognized as being, top-notch, for which, as a commissioner and as a resident of the state, I appreciate very much. As the chair has pointed out, this is a substantial risk to safety, health, and I guess the only thing that concerns me a little bit in the terms and conditions, although I'm not sure this commission has jurisdiction or authority over it, is there's no stipulation that says that you'll protect the cost of these fines and or penalties from your customers. And it can become very expensive for the customer to kind of supplement the penalties that are awarded in cases like this. So I would only emphasize that let's be mindful of the public and the customer interest in these matters, as well as their safety and their health. All right? Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. No further comments, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Correa.
Is it your internal procedure or process to examine or check these things every 6 months, or will you be doing that, or are we recommending that they internally check before we go? They internally check every 6 months and make a log. Pipes inspected, July 11th.
Yes,
It's 105.
we have a series of tests that we have to perform, and they're either 1-year tests, 5-year tests. It's based on whatever we're told to test. And now that we have hired this outside company, JD Relic, they are keeping it up to date. We actually have another inspection coming up August 8th for the state of Delaware, and we're positive that that's going to go perfect.
Right.
Verify that they've done that. They're keeping a log, and we're checking their records to
Wonderful. Thank you.
Motion to approve and adopt order number 9085.
Second the motion?
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve proposed order number 9085? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Mr. Ellis, thank you for your attendance. Mr. Palmer, best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next item, number 2, is in the matter of the notice of potential violation regarding Chagrin Gas, and we have proposed order number 9086. Mr. Walsh.
Facilities and records. Sunset Harbor, Ocean View, Seagrass Plantation, Nellis Point, and Dagsboro, Temple Islands, Rehoboth, Lewis. Report dated April 4th, 10 violations. Discussed with the company and the council. Some
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Lambert,
Yes, sir.
would you have any comments to make on behalf of the company?
Just that we have addressed all the issues and corrected them, and appreciate the staff bringing those to our attention so we could address those. So we feel everything is safe and up to par. So we agree with the assessment, and we'll pay the penalty.
How many other places do you have gas operations in that were not examined?
We examined all the ones in the state of Delaware that we have that are jurisdictional. So, yes. Well, since it's the propane is, we have lots of individual tanks or tanks that are not jurisdictional systems. So,
Okay.
a number of those, many.
Any questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chair, same question that I asked before is why were the inspections not done?
The Sunset Harbor, the best that I could determine, was a project that started, and then as soon as it started as far as installing tanks, then the economy tanked, and then that community went dormant. They sold out. The developer was no longer the builder there, so it just sat dormant. Then years later, it started back up, and we, Shaker Gas, did not follow through with the requirements of the PSC.
I have a question, Mr. Platt, if you don't mind. So when the first company came forward and explained that they had hired someone to do or to assist with the inspections, if a company does not perform in this particular industry inspecting the safety and the health of these systems, are they licensed? Do they lose a license? Are they somehow red flagged? Or is it possible that the same companies can underperform for a number of different customers?
To my knowledge, that what you're asking is entirely possible. We certainly don't do anything. We don't have any jurisdiction over those companies. It's a subcontractor to them. And I don't know that there's anyone else out there that takes any penalty against those companies.
So this could be a situation where the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and someone could be making inspections or underperforming that could represent a risk.
While that's true, I guess that's where we come in, and it's our responsibility to do an annual inspection to make sure that those subcontractors are performing.
Okay.
Only we're directing our inspection towards the operator, not his subcontractor.
I understand. I'm just trying to determine if the subcontractor operations might represent an underlying risk for some operators who are using them.
It could.
All right. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Commissioner Gray.
Move we adopt order number 9086.
I second.
Any discussion on the motion to approve proposed order 9086? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. Good luck, Mr. Lambert.
Thank you.
Okay, number 3 is in the matter of the application of Artesian Water Company for a certificate of public convenience and necessity. And I guess, Mr. Willard, do you want to start on this?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, this is Artesian's request for a CPCN. This is a single parcel of land. It's my understanding there's either one or possibly two people who live in the house that we're talking about.
Yes.
There's a request for waiver of rules, and the reason is this. The landowner asked Artesian in May, will you please supply water? We're building a home. We need water by July. Well, the rule says Artesian has to tell the landowner 30 to 35 days before the application that they're going to apply. Well, they didn't apply until the landowner asked, so they want that rule waived. There's another rule that says for 75 days after the application, any landowner can complain about it, file a complaint. Again, we only have one landowner here, and they have filed a letter signed by both of the owners asking the director here to ask the commission to waive that rule as well, because it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This is a single landowner. They need their water by mid-July when they move in. And so Artesian will now be ready to put that in place by mid-July. And we ask that those two rules be waived because there's really, no harm done. The landowners know what's going on. They've asked for it, et cetera.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Willard.
I have, those are pretty much the exact facts.
For the record, state your name.
For the record, Scott Steffen for Artesian Water Company. Those were the exact facts. They were building a house down in Selbyville, Delaware. We have a water main that runs right in front of the property. Unfortunately, we didn't have the CPCN. This gentleman, he is a contractor, but was not familiar with the CPCN regulations. So he was having the house built, thought he could just call us up to connect in. Made him aware of the time frame that would normally take. But we talked to staff. They were supportive of a waiver. So we applied for it in our application. He needs water to get a CO, certificate of occupancy, which is why he shouldn't have that by mid-July so that they could potentially move into their house by the end of July. Complicating it was they had sold their house up in North Wilmington. Closing is pending. So that's kind of why we got into this particular situation. So.
Thank you.
This is order number 9076, which you have been presented. And like I said, staff is recommending that you go ahead and approve that order and grant the CPCN.
Any questions, commissioners?
Chair, I move that the commission adopt order number 9076 as submitted.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Let there be water.
Thank you. Mr. Zicola, thanks.
That's the end of our regular agenda, and our hearing schedule is nothing on that. And is there anyone here from the public that wishes to make any comments to the Public Service Commission? Sometime I'm going to make that announcement, and there's actually going to be someone who's going to stand up and come and tell something. I hope so. Okay, Mr. Howard, it's your...
Chairman Winslow, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity once again to share with you some additional information. I will defer to Mr. Hartigan, who has made arrangements for some very informative information with respect to ChargePoint.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Chair and Commissioners, I'd like to introduce Dave Schatz and Mike Waters from ChargePoint. You may be aware ChargePoint is an industry leader in designing, building, and supporting electric vehicle charging stations. So they just wanted to give you an overview of the company and the EV situation here in Delaware. Dave?
Thanks. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Dave Schatz. I'm Director for Public Policy at ChargePoint. And together with my colleague, Mike Waters, who's Director of Utility Solutions at ChargePoint, we thank you for your time today. We come before the Commission to give you a brief overview of the rapidly growing field of electric vehicles and charging stations. Across the country, we're really seeing tremendous growth in these industries. And as these technologies are grid connected, we're seeing a lot of interest from utility commissions across the country in developing a sound regulatory framework to prepare for this growth. Much of the presentation that we're providing today is really for your perusal. We will hit the high points. We have a lot of material here, so in the interest of time, we'll just provide an overview. So next slide. So just to go over what we'll be seeing today and going over today, we want to introduce you to the company, some of the basics of EV charging, what does charging actually look like, and then Mike will go over some of the utility interest in this space and some of the models that we're seeing deployed for utility involvement. And then we can answer any questions that you might have about electric vehicles and charging. Next slide. So ChargePoint's the largest network of electric vehicle charging stations in the world. We have over 38,000 charging spots throughout the United States. That's in 49 states. So we come with a lot of experience in the space for policy and regulatory frameworks that work to develop scalable electric vehicle markets. Next slide. Our mission really is to provide charging solutions for every possible situation that an EV driver might find themselves in. So we do have products for homes, for workplaces, around town, corridors, everywhere in between. And we're seeing a lot of this infrastructure be deployed in many of these categories, some faster than others. Our business model really is selling hardware, our hardware, to customers, these customers here, where they will own the hardware, and we will offer a network solution or a cloud-based solution to provide data and information to that site host, to that customer. That's the real value here, is providing data to customers, to site hosts, and Mike will go over some of the kinds of data that we provide to workplaces, to retail establishments, to homeowners that help them better manage their charging asset and make the most of their investment. Next slide. So just to go over some basics here to level set. Next slide. There are three basic levels of charging. Level 1 is what we would call kind of below normal or sub-average. Level 1 is just your outlet, right, your socket right in the side of, on the side of your house or in your home, just like you would charge up your cell phone. We believe that this is, again, below par, so to speak, or above par as is, above par because it's too slow for most electric vehicles out there today. The range is too high. The battery is too large to charge in any kind of meaningful way in a necessary amount of time for most customers. So you see there 18 plus hours for an electric vehicle that has 80 miles of range. That's simply just too high. The new normal is really level 2. And above level 2 there and above all of those levels is a picture of what the charging, the actual connector looks like. It is standardized at this point throughout the United States, so other charging station companies that are in the space offer the same connector. This is, again, level 2 is normal, 12 to 25 miles of range per hour, so 2 to 4 hours for most electric vehicles that are out there today. As we see ranges get even higher, battery capacity is greater, you're going to need a faster charging solution. So that's where DC Fast comes in, and this is really where a lot of the growth is right now. Faster rates of charging to meet the real needs of a lot of EV drivers out there today and the expectations. So 15 to 45 minutes for 100% charge. We're coming closer to the kind of charging times or refueling times that most drivers are used to. Next slide. So as I explained, we have a network charging solution. What this means is that all of our stations are cloud enabled and they provide real-time data and real-time availability on a lot of mapping systems that are out there. You could see our stations. You could see whether they're available or not. That's helpful to know whether you can actually charge there at that time. How a normal session might work is a EV driver would drive up to one of our charging stations. They would wave a ChargePoint card in front of that station, and it would automatically connect that charging session to their account. An account costs no money it costs no money to have a ChargePoint card. It works very similar to an Easy Pass, where you would preload it with an amount of money. If there is a charge for a charging session, if there is a fee, then it would just deduct down and then re-up again. All of the transaction is handled on the back end. So the charging session would start, and then they could check their status on their phone via an app to see where they are in their charging cycle. Next slide. So with this network, and it's a nationwide network, and again, we're not the only provider in this space, and a lot of this holds true for many of our competitors, but there's a value to everyone that's involved, and there are three main parties that are involved in EVs, in electric vehicles. First is, of course, the EV drivers. With a networked solution, they get, as I explained, availability of charging stations. They get information about their charging sessions, how long it's taking, so on and so forth. Then there are site hosts, the people who actually own the charging stations, and those folks get information about their energy usage, the energy management and per kilowatt hour accounting of what's being used at the charging station. Obviously, this is very valuable information, but also information about how many unique drivers they have coming to their sites. How far are they coming from, generally? You can see how a retailer might want to know a lot of these points of information. And then I'll save a lot of the utility content for Mike. Mike's part of the presentation. But needless to say, as these are grid connected, there's a lot of data similar to what's provided to site hosts, but even more so and more in-depth that can be provided to utilities and is useful to them in managing the grid. Next slide. A little bit about what the trajectory of electric vehicles in the market is right now. Next slide. So there are a lot of pretty pictures here. A lot of new models of electric vehicles that are already out on the streets. And for the most part, they're hiding in plain sight because a lot of them are existing models that are offered in an all-electric version. There are not a lot of just standalone, this model is only an electric. I think that will probably change. Next slide. You'll see a lot of new models that are coming out that are really dedicated. I think this points to the mainstreaming of electric vehicles overall. Now, a little bit about the trend. Next slide. The trend is tremendous growth year over year. With a little, I wouldn't even call it a blip in 2015 because it's still an incredible number. But with gas prices and everything like that, there's a lot of speculation. Needless to say, 2016 was a really big year for electric vehicles. We see the same kind of growth year over year. And in fact, at this point in the year, we're 36% over last year in terms of sales.
David, have you had the opportunity to read the new EEI report on EVs?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Bill will put another point on here that they're prognosticating 7 million vehicles in 2025.
I mean, it's a lot. I mean, these are very mainstream at this point.
So the infrastructure needs are going to be quite substantial.
Yes, and there are some numbers that are out there. I think EPRI put forward a number that was a ratio of cars to charging stations of about 4 to 1. Between 4 and 5 to 1 charging stations. So obviously with 7 million out there, I'm not good enough at math to do it right now. But you can see that the needs are great. Next slide. So we have ChargePoint drivers that have the ChargePoint card that are able to charge at our charging stations. Here's where they're located in Delaware. You can see it's a pretty wide a pretty wide net here. There are a lot of drivers that are located all over the state. Sometimes it's surprising to folks to find that there are EV drivers in parts of states that traditionally don't have a lot of things like charging infrastructure readily available. But we are seeing that. 64% in the state, 64% year over year growth in the amount of electric vehicles that are here in Delaware. It's among one of the highest rates in the country. So we're seeing this. This is one of the reasons that we wanted to come here today, is to let you know that electric vehicles are not only coming, they're here, and they're continuing to grow. Next slide. Here's where the infrastructure is currently. Most of it is level 2, but you do have some DC fast charging available, about 33 stations at 7 different sites. This data is readily available at AFDC, which is Department of Energy's website, which kind of amasses all of the data about existing charging stations for folks to see. We do have our own app that is able to, again, locate a lot of these and point drivers in the direction to use them. And some of our customers, just to mention, Royal Farms, BMW, we do have a lot of, across state lines, we have arrangements with a lot of these customers, Tanger outlets, to provide charging stations at their sites. So again, mainstream as far as the site hosts are concerned. Next slide. So, Mike, you want to take it from here?
Great. So just to repeat, Mike Waters, Director of Utility Solutions for ChargePoint. I'm going to pick it up from here as we begin to think a little bit more about how electric vehicles impact the grid. We're used to thinking of electric utilities as supplying three sectors. You have commercial, industrial, residential, and now we're talking transportation, so that's a little bit different, a little bit new, but it's really exciting. And I think as we go through some of the slides here, you'll see some of the opportunities associated with that. So next slide, please. So why utilities are very interested in the electricity used to fuel vehicles, the first is really around cost pressures that exist today, right? We have, there's upgrades that need to happen to infrastructure, et cetera, while at the same time load is flat or declining in many cases. And so that can actually cause an increase in rates. And so this is a new load, which is quite flexible and can actually help reduce those costs. We can touch on that a little bit later. Some of the other benefits, not only is this good for the grid, but it's also better for the driver. They have a cheaper fuel source, a more exciting vehicle. It's better for the environment. We have better air quality, and it even drives economic development because now you're not spending money to go buy oil from out of your state or out of the country. You're actually helping to reinvest it in fuel that's generated locally, as electric utilities do. If we look at the general responsibilities for utilities, it's always about supplying adequate, safe, reliable energy. And now as we think about it from a standpoint of electric vehicles, what does that mean? Well, these vehicles, even though from an aggregate perspective it's quite small, but if you look at a home, it could be the biggest energy and power draw in that home. And so it's very prudent for electric utilities to be examining this load, understanding it, and putting into place, hopefully, some rates and other programs to help manage that load to be off peak to the extent possible. So next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits here. Because it is so flexible, it can actually help with intermittent sources like solar, et cetera, and wind. So be able to actually map when you charge the vehicle to when there is an excess of energy on the grid, or to throttle it when you have challenges on the grid. That's really easy when we look at electric vehicle charging. And as you look at this new distributed energy resource world that's evolving, we have solar and microgrids and energy storage. And these vehicles are interesting because they're a little bit of a combination, right? You have, obviously, we have a battery anywhere from 20 to 70 kilowatt hours today. Think about when that might be able to put energy back onto the grid, which is more in the future, but that's still something that will likely be happening when we look out into the future. So this is a really interesting technology, and how could it help a grid in terms of managing the load on the grid? The other question that comes up, of course, is, well, is this good for all ratepayers? I may not have an electric car, right? What does this mean to me? The good news is a lot of studies that have looked at this, and this is an example from a group called E3 out in California, but there's also studies in New York and Massachusetts, Ohio, that look at this, and they have determined that the cost to serve the load is outweighed by the revenue from these vehicles. And so essentially that means that you're going to have downward pressure on rates in the long run. So that is a good thing as well, even if you don't own an electric vehicle. But obviously there's other benefits, as we highlighted earlier, whether it's air quality, economic development, et cetera. Next slide, please. As we think about the value and how to extract the most value, we have started from the perspective of it should all be connected smart charging. So all of our infrastructure is connected. It has embedded metrology, so we know exactly what's being dispensed through this charging station. We have two-way communications, and we have the ability to do load management. And so this provides a lot of value, whether you're the driver and you want to know what's going on with your vehicle or schedule it, or if you're a site host and you want to be able to control who uses your station and optimize it, or if you're a utility and you want the data and you want to be able to do load management. All of that is enabled by that same platform. And you can see a few examples here with these two graphs. The first just looks at, it's a histogram of the average amount of energy used by folks in the home. And it's about 11 to 12 kilowatt hours on a weekday. So that gives you an idea of how much they use. But now let's look at it and see, okay, what does that look like from a load profile perspective? That's the bottom graph. And we have two lines there. And this is just an example of two different utilities. One is in California, where they have a TOU rate just for that electric vehicle. The other is just a standard home rate. And you can see how easy it is to shape that load profile. Obviously, the one that has a nice smooth bell curve, that's the unmanaged charging, where you have folks come home late afternoon, plug in, and you have your peak in the late afternoon or early evening. Usually that's coincident with some of the grid issues in the summertime. And then in the other graph, you can see how it's much flatter and then spikes up later in the evening around 10 or 11 p.m. And that's, again, an evidence of how easy it is to shape this load with the right incentive. Next slide, please. Utilities are thinking about EVs and what to do about them. They are looking at a bunch of things, and it can be everything from just looking at customer service, customer support, how do they do their planning. They might be looking at rates. They might be doing their own fleet electrification. And in some cases, they're actually looking at, well, how do I help support the deployment of infrastructure out there and charging infrastructure and do that in a way that provides them data and load management capability. And that's where in this graph, I just give you an idea of the states in which at least one utility is actively looking at such a program. And it's a lot of states. And a lot of these are in development, but there are some that have launched as well. And that's where I'd like to show you in the next slide, please. Just a listing of a couple of examples of the big utility programs out there today, not all inclusive. But I just want to highlight a few of them because it's interesting in that it shows you some of the different models that are being looked at. So the first being Southern Cal Edison. They have what's termed a make-ready program. And the make-ready is all the electrical infrastructure between the point of service, the meter, in a commercial property, and the actual charging station itself, but not the charging station. So it's up to sometimes called the stub, or where that is mounted on the wall. And that can be more than half the cost. But in this case, the utility is actually paying, deploying, and maintaining for that electrical infrastructure, and then allowing the site host to put the station on the end of that and control it in a way that they would like to. And there's also a rebate involved as well for the charging station in order to do a DR program in the future. Another model would be SDG&E. This is a really interesting, although complicated one. It's a custodian model in which they actually own the charging station as well as the make-ready, and they maintain that, although there are options for the site host to still be able to set all of the operational parameters associated with that charging station. So that's a model, or a different type of model compared to SoCal Edison. Another one would be, let's say, the rebate model, and this is really the most efficient way to encourage deployment of infrastructure, but also do it in a way that is quick and allows for the site host to have ultimate control. Examples here, Duke Energy, LADWP, in which they simply offer a financial incentive, and in exchange for that, usually, again, there's a requirement to provide data and or load management capabilities to the utility. So. And then there's a few more in Massachusetts, which are interesting. On the East Coast, these are some of the biggest ones that have been filed. One is a make-ready and one is a rebate program. So, again, a couple of examples to look at there. Next slide, please. As we think about these programs, and we've engaged with every utility that is looking at any of these programs, and what we have learned over the last 8 years and what we encourage utilities to look at when we talk about the design of the program are these bullets here. And the first is around choice. Let's make sure that the site host, this commercial property, has the choice of what they want to put in. And it's not just one type, one size fits all. They should be able to select the charging station that makes sense for them. The second bullet is just around innovation. And we are constantly innovating, coming out with new products. We want to make sure there's not a one-off RFP or something like that sets the technology in stone for years when we are evolving in months time period, right? And we want to make sure that customers and participants have that ability to select from the latest and greatest. The third is just skin in the game. I think everybody acknowledges that anything free usually isn't deployed that well. You really want to make sure folks have an investment in anything that's installed on their property. So they need to make sure that there is some skin in the game. And there might be exceptions if there's economically disadvantaged areas, but for the most part, there should be skin in the game. The flexibility for the site host to have ultimate control on that station. Again, this is something that they're trying to match with the use case of what the drivers are doing on their property. Maybe it's employees, maybe it's visitors to a destination place. It could be a retailer. Let's let them have the ability to set the operational parameters in terms of who can use it and for how long, what the pricing should be, et cetera. The last point, or second to last, is just around acknowledging that drivers are going to drive everywhere. They're just not going to exist in one single jurisdictional territory, right? They want to be able to have the same experience here as in D.C. or in Philadelphia. And so it's important that there not necessarily be walls or boundaries or island effects, really, in terms of the way a pricing scenario or who can use the stations and what that looks like. And the last is just encouraging smart charging, right? If a utility is investing in this, it just makes sense to make sure that they get something out of it in terms of data and load management. Next slide, please. A few other things to consider from a policy perspective. The first is just ensuring that there's clarity for these site hosts. We don't want, they shouldn't be treated as regulated utilities, right? They're providing a charging service, and they want to make sure that that's just clear, that they're not violating any laws or any issues just because they do that, and perhaps also charge by any means that they would feel is appropriate, right? It might be by session, it might be by time length, or maybe it's by a variable unit of energy, because vehicles charge at different rates. And so the ability to charge per kilowatt hour would be helpful from their perspective to ensure that, again, they have the right pricing perspective.
And that's currently not the law in Delaware. to be clear, or it's just an area of regulatory uncertainty. 20 states in the District of Columbia have already made this determination and allow site hosts to charge by kilowatt hour. This is an additional tool in the toolkit for a lot of site hosts that want to connect what they are putting through the charging stations and what they pay on their bill every month, their utility bill every month. So it's something that I think we're looking at. We'd certainly look at in every state that hasn't currently made the clarification, and I think Delaware is one where we would look to that clarification as well.
Great. And just a few other points as we think about some of the pilot programs, which can really help inform utilities in terms of the load profiles and how they can be managed. It could be through load management. It could be simple DR. It could be time of use rates. It could be utilizing the embedded metering that's in these stations today to really incentivize people to charge off peak, whether it's done on the bill or maybe it's off the bill as a rebate or a gift card or something like that. And then finally, just thinking about rate structures. So obviously, rates today did not envision transportation being part of what's being provided the electricity. And so as we think about in the commercial space, this really applies for DC fast charging. This is where, as we talked about earlier, vehicles have more battery size, greater electric miles. They're traveling longer. And we're going to have a lot of cases now where folks need to charge faster. And charge a lot more when they're doing this. And so DC fast charging is where we're talking 100 kilowatts to a couple of hundred, so size of a grocery store in terms of load. But the load factor will be low in the beginning, right? We're just not that many vehicles today, but it will grow over time. And I think taking that into consideration and being able to have a rate that really looks at electric transportation as its sole focus can help enable this adoption to occur and give it some time to grow over the next few years. Without that, it can be very difficult for site hosts to install this infrastructure, depending on what the demand charge structure looks like and given load factors in the beginning. Next slide, please. This is what my colleague just spoke of. I think our neighboring Maryland and D.C. allow for that charging by kilowatt hour, but we already touched on that. Next slide, please. So just to wrap it up, just want to emphasize that electric vehicles are actually growing at a pretty substantial rate. I think it was 60-something% in
64.
in the year-over-year from 2016. So I think it's definitely here. It's coming. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to continue to grow over time. The ability to fuel that with electricity is a great thing, not only for utilities but for the community and for the economy. The EV charging infrastructure industry that we're representing, it's a very dynamic, very innovating industry and a competitive industry. In terms of thinking about who puts in this charging infrastructure, there's a lot of commercial property owners out there that put this in for different reasons. They don't do it necessarily to make money off of and to pay for everything just through driver fees. It may be doing a fringe benefit for an employee. Could just be something to encourage customers to come and shop at their location. So there's a lot of reasons why people put the charging infrastructure in. And then from a utility standpoint, again, a great load, very flexible load. Really encourage looking at things, whether they be TOU rates or demand response programs, et cetera. And infrastructure programs as well can be very helpful as we look at this coming period of the next 5 to 10 years of supporting this. And we're always willing and interested in wanting to work with them to develop the best type of program that can help encourage smart charging and also encourage a sustainable and thriving marketplace in the EV charging industry as well. Thank you for your time.
Yep. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We look forward to being a resource.
Mr. Gray.
Yes, thank you. Very, very good, interesting presentation. I have a question where you talked about the levels 1, 2, and 3, and your connectors are different. The question is, can most EV vehicles connect to any of these levels, or does the model design constrain the vehicle to one or the other?
So generally speaking, all vehicles can charge with the same connector on AC level 1 and AC level 2. That is the same connector. I don't know if I came across that way in the diagram. And so all the vehicles are all the same with one exception, which is Tesla. They have a unique connector, but they have an adapter in order to use the standard charging stations that are out there on the AC level 2 side. DC fast charging, there are technically 3 different ones, standards out there today. There's a Japanese one, there's a North American/European one, and then a Tesla one as well. So there are 3 different connectors on the DC fast charging side.
Does that imply that when you deploy a charging station, you have to put the appropriate variety of connectors in the event an EV vehicle with that match shows up?
Yes. So for DC fast charging, as an example, our product, we have both connectors available. when I say both, Tesla's a proprietary one. So the other two, the SAE and the Chatamo, we offer both on the same station so that anybody could pull up and use a standard connector. And again, there's an adapter for Tesla.
So if you, on this same chart where you talked about the charging levels, have a vehicle that has a range of about 80 miles, right? Give me an impression, if I showed up to get 80 miles worth of charging, what would I pay, range estimate?
Very hard to tell you what somebody would pay because it would be based on what that site host would determine is the right thing that they wanted to charge. I actually don't have any data on me that says what I typically see or what customers usually see in terms of using these stations. I don't know if you have any data on what they would pay.
You're exactly right, Mike, because the site host determines the price. In our model, the site host would determine the price that's right for their site. So if they want to offer it for free, as in a lot of cases, a site host would offer this charging for free because they want to draw customers to their locations if they're a retail establishment, say. As we get into DC fast charging, where the economics are a little bit different, you have demand charges and other considerations that you might not have at the lower rates of charging. I think that you're going to see a lot of new pricing models come out of it, but it varies site to site very greatly.
I could tell you that it would be 25 kilowatt hours, and it might take 20 minutes, but that's about 20, 30 minutes. But beyond that, it's really site host specific on what they would charge.
I was just trying to make, first of all, a comparison between the gasoline, say $2.40 a gallon. That's about $9 to $10, to go 80 miles. And I guess the last question is, does this, because you have so much variability in the charge, in the cost, does this imply that unlike a gas station, you can find gas in a state within a range of prices, but the electric vehicle driver may wind up in one place where it's free and another place is $100? You know what I mean?
I would say that there will be different prices, yes, based on where they might charge. Now, the good news is, of course, there would be transparency and visibility into that by using any of these apps that we've talked about. In fact, NIST, I believe, also has some standards around the display of pricing, et cetera. So there are elements that help ensure that everybody knows the pricing. And that's one of the benefits of having a connected charging station is that you will be told exactly, too, if anything changed on that pricing. You're given all that heads up, and you have the ability to know.
Right, one last. Do you know of any states that have attempted to get their arms around a range of pricing that the electric vehicle driver might experience? Any states that are trying to crack that?
Yeah, I would say that we've seen utility program proposals that include an EV rate of a sort. But a lot of those take a lot of studying to figure out what the right rate would be.
Yeah.
I think while it is a very rapidly growing field, these are some of the growing pains that are associated with trying to make sure there's a strong and sustainable regulatory framework. So a lot of states are taking on investigatory dockets to look at this exact question of what the right range of prices is. But you mentioned about $100 or something like that. While that's just an example, I would say that a site host that charges up to that rate would probably not have a lot of EV drivers coming to their sites.
Depends on whether you're running out of power on the road.
How desperate the driver is.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're planning your second trip a little bit better, I think.
That's right.
I have no further questions. This is very, very good information. I certainly appreciate you presenting it and sharing it with us. Good luck.
I have a question. You talked about the 80-mile range as an average in 2016. Is that average, it seems low to me, and is that taking into consideration hybrids versus an all-electric car is going to have a lot higher range?
It's getting even higher. The Chevy Bolt just came out recently. It has a range of 238 miles.
Yeah.
So this average is going up, and we're going to see it go up over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify that, when that range was used, that was for pure electric vehicles. And so as a plug-in hybrid, yes, you'd be adding a couple hundred miles of gasoline option, right?
So there are all-electric cars that only have an 80-mile range?
Yeah, that's where some of them started, was with 80. But as was just mentioned, I mean, the battery costs have plummeted in like 70% in the last 5 years. And so we're seeing greater range now, ability or options on the vehicles. And so we're seeing, I think 200 miles is going to become pretty much the new norm. And, people don't drive much more than 30-something miles in a day. That's kind of the average. It's the long trips that matter.
Do you have a crystal ball for what happens in the city with row homes where you don't really have a set parking space or a garage?
I mean, that's definitely a challenge is when we get into multifamily dwellings. We are seeing the same, questions in Philadelphia and some other places where how do you provide charging solutions where you don't have a garage? So what we would say there is that you need at least, two different options. You could have one at the workplace, which is always helpful, or you could have one in public somewhere nearby, right? And that's where, whether it's street side or whether it's just public access, maybe it's DC fast charging where you just need to do it once every week to go charge. If you had a 200-mile range battery, you might only stop by once a week. So I think between those options, you're able to meet those needs of giving those folks a charging solution if they don't have a garage.
Yeah, there may be a community model that comes up. Something, there might be a central place for folks to plug in that's, DC, as Mike said, DC fast, so that folks would stop by maybe on the way home. But these are all new models that are coming out, and I think that a lot of programs that are being proposed are having these things in mind, especially when it comes to multi-unit dwellings, because that is one of the most difficult markets to serve. The price to put in a garage, say, let alone a row, but a garage with a lot of different cars, a lot of different spaces, it's really hard to put in charging stations because the infrastructure's been there and it hasn't been designed to have this kind of load. And might not have the capacity. So we're seeing the community charging, but also kind of multi-unit dwelling proposals and a lot of utility proposals that have come up.
Awesome.
Mr. Correa.
On page 3, you had mentioned that your $200+ million of investment. Are you a private company or a public company?
We're a private company.
Of course, because this and the recent investment by Siemens and those people, I mean Chrysler, are they ownership interest or they are investing on bonds or is it a debt or a share?
It's an equity. It's an equity. Okay.
Yeah. I have one question. On the bottom of each page, it says proprietary and confidential. Do not distribute.
Yeah, that's been updated.
Okay.
It's the same exact deck. It was just a vestige of.
I was hoping you weren't going to say, now that I've told you, I got to kill you.
Hopefully you know me well enough by now, right?
Dave, Mike, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very, very much. Chairman, Commissioners, the only thing I have on my agenda is that we have another commission meeting scheduled for Tuesday, July the 25th, starting at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody.
See you then.
We're adjourned.
Oh, we have to stop this time.
Mr. Drexler insists I hit the button.
Don? Is Jay coming tomorrow?
You can give this to him so you can put it in the process.
Well, pass that down. That's the empty one.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So anyway, she just said that she wanted to put one of these newer
Okay.
So it's just like a computer.
Still happy over still functions?
She didn't trade. She put.
I see what you mean, okay. You know, and it's possible that they don't have enough experience, and they don't know how, when they sell them used, when they sell a used car, associated, probably don't know how to run it.
Glad to see the staff initiate this.
I drive my wife. My wife.
Of personnel management.
So it's good.
Although some days it feels like it.
Done.
That's a very good presentation.
Yes. still like the word.
Yeah.
Sorry.